tariffs on European cars? Is that something you're going to consider?
Oh, absolutely. I will do that. Yeah.
Mr. President,
Think of it. They have millions of cars coming in, millions and millions of cars. One of probably the largest. Japan's very big too, but and they don't accept our cars. We make great cars. They don't have our cars, but we have their cars. They don't have our farm products. We have the greatest farmers in the world. They don't accept our farm products, and we accept theirs. So, you know, things are going to change unless they do what they have to do, and they know what they have to do. This is not going to be a tough battle. In my opinion, not going to be tough. Just like when Ontario charged us, everybody said, oh, they just charged. I said, this will be won in 1 hour. And they announced what we were going to do, and they withdrew their little threat.
If you look around on roads in the United States, chances are you might find quite a few European cars, mostly from German luxury brands. But when you look around on European roads, you'd be hard-pressed to find a modern-day American car. Interesting, considering it wasn't always like this. How did this happen? Welcome everyone to episode 65 of the Automotive History series, where I'm going to take you on a tour through the past decades and look at the role of the American car in continental Europe, and also explain why I don't see a lot of American cars here anymore. Since I'm from the Netherlands, it's mostly from a Dutch angle. Camera joke. But I think it's a similar story in many other European countries as well. Welcome everyone to how the American car failed in Europe. After doing quite a few episodes on the history of a car industry of various countries, I started to notice a pattern. American car companies aggressively expanded, and by the 1920s and 30s, companies like Ford and General Motors were active in almost all far corners of the world, including Europe. Especially countries like the Netherlands, which didn't have a national car industry to begin with and was always internationally oriented, welcomed foreign car makers to sell cars there. Ford was already active in the 1930s and quite popular with cars like the Model A, although it should be noted that car ownership at this point was still fairly low. Cars were very much a luxury for many Europeans at the time, but if you owned a car, chances were that it was an American car, valued for its solid build quality, powerful engine, and great level of comfort. And mind you, cars like a Ford Model A weren't even all that big and fuel-thirsty, as is now commonly associated with American cars. The image of American cars in the US in general further improved after the Second World War. See, not only the Americans were seen as the liberators of Europe, right after the war, the Marshall Plan was enacted, where the US sent all kinds of goods and services free of charge to Europe to help rebuild the war-torn nations. So you better not say anything bad about these people, as they helped to win the war and helped to rebuild the country afterwards. And with this help also came the American culture and way of life to Europe in the 1950s. People looked up to the USA, which just experienced its post-war economic boom, where everything was big and impressive. Houses were big, cities were impressive, fridges were large and fully stocked, and cars looked cool. People watched American movies in theaters, wanted to chase the latest fashion trends from the USA, and listened to American rock and roll music on the radio. But what about the cars? To say that American cars swarmed European roads is a bit of an exaggeration, but looking at pictures from the 50s and the 60s, you certainly see quite a few Detroit cars driving around. But as always, owning a car in Europe was expensive, so owning an American car that dramatically changed in size, engine displacement, and fuel consumption during these years was quite the next step. Most people that drove American cars had such jobs like doctors, lawyers, managers, but also for very practical reasons like ambulances and taxis. Looking at some of the brochures at the time, well-equipped Chevrolets and Fords were often priced right up there with the more expensive BMWs, Jaguars, and Mercedes. But that wouldn't stop American car makers from trying to sell them here, because both Ford and General Motors had other tricks up their sleeves. Ford also had a separate line of European models, mostly from Germany and the UK, and GM owned Opel. And when you look at pictures from car shows from the 1960s, almost all models made by these giants were on display. So when you had a bit of money, you could buy a Ford. And when you really had some money, a Ford, but from the United States. By the 1960s, most European countries experienced their own post-war economic boom, some 10 years after rebuilding the country. Wages increased and the average European could finally afford such luxuries like the Americans already had. It became an unofficial contest in the neighborhood who was the first to own a TV, a refrigerator, or a car. But, as always, money is tight, and automobile ownership a costly endeavor, so Europeans usually chose for typical people's cars instead of full-size land yachts. Case in point, my grandfather's first car was a Fiat 600, and not a Chevrolet Impala. But, as luck would have it, around this time the American car makers just released their own compact cars in a reaction to the growing popularity of compact cars in the US. Cars like the Chevrolet Corvair, the Ford Falcon, and the Chrysler Valiant proved to be popular around the world. Although they were intended as cheap and budget-friendly cars in the US, they were often regarded as well-appointed compact luxury cars in many other parts of the world. The Falcon became a legendary model in Australia and South America, and the same can be said about Chrysler Valiant and Dart cars. In Spain, the Darts were converted by a local company and seen as full-on luxury cars. Budget cars or not, in the USA, in the European eye, you still get a fairly large car, not huge as some land yacht, that came standard with a 6 or 8 cylinder engine, an automatic transmission, which pretty much sums up European luxury cars at the time, like a Jaguar or a Mercedes. And so, especially the mid-size and smaller American cars proved to be somewhat popular in Europe through the 60s. Those that really made it had the full-size American cars, and even some royal families drove American cars, including the Dutch royal family, who used to own American Fords. But then, by the 1970s, much of the world, including Europe, was hit by the effects of the oil crisis of 1973. In the meantime, especially the full-size American cars grew to gigantic proportions, with huge engines and a fuel consumption that would rival my dad's alcohol addiction. Not exactly the perfect fit for Europe with its small roads, parking spaces, high fuel prices and taxation. And it was. British TV program Thames Television from the 1970s did 2 segments on why American cars were bought in Britain. Although a clear answer was not given, they mostly talked about why American cars won't fit in the UK.
How do the American importers manage to sell any at all when they appear so unsuitable for use on our roads?
Some drivers said that they appreciated the loads of standard equipment and luxuries from many American cars came with. You absolutely had a good deal on a car if you were willing to pay for it.
They're tremendous value for money. The optional equipment that you can get for your money is outstanding, and only American cars can offer this sort of value for this sort of equipment.
But with the fuel crisis also came new mid-size, compact and downsized models. And as much as these cars were sold in the US with the message that they were American with European size and handling and were a great alternative to cars like a Mercedes, which they weren't, they were also sold in Europe with the exact same message, with then the other way around, which actually worked. Cars like the Chevrolet Malibu and the Ford Granada were the perfect blend between European size, weight, and fuel consumption, and typical American comfort and luxuries for those that wanted it. A great alternative for a regular Mercedes. And during these years, the exchange rates were also favorable, making some American cars more accessible than ever. But here is where the role of the American car also started its great decline. The Malaise era, the time when overall quality and engineering of American cars were at an all-time low, also affected their status in Europe. Also, the taste in automobiles changed and the gap between American and European cars became wider. A great example are the various European models from the 1980s with futuristic and aerodynamic design, whereas some American cars were still stuck in the 70s with vinyl tops and waterfall grills, the whole Brougham package. And these are fashion trends that most Europeans didn't like or didn't understood what the appeal was. And I'm not saying that the following 2 examples contribute to the decline of the image of the American car in the Netherlands specifically, but during the 1980s and 90s, American cars were increasingly seen as gaudy cars for gaudy people. In the 70s and 80s, you had a comedy duo performing various sketches on TV. They were self-proclaimed free guys, small entrepreneurs with shady business practices, if you know what I mean. And what did they drive? Exclusively American cars.
Zelf heb ik eigenlijk uitsluitend 25 jaar lang Amerikanen gereden. Chrysler, Oldsmobile, Studebaker, Ness. Nou, je kan ze niet kwijt, het benzine, ze worden zo gejat. Nee. Dus nu ben ik aan het kijken naar een Europeaantje.
And then there was a fictional TV series where a dysfunctional white trash family was placed in a luxurious and upscale neighborhood, and you can imagine what shenanigans would follow. And what do they drive? A pink Chevrolet convertible. I think you start to get the idea. Some people started to associate these land yachts with people like Liberace and Elvis, and not the 50s Elvis, but the 70s Elvis. Loud, dramatic, gaudy, overdressed, and huge. Sales declined during the 1980s and 1990s, and so the American car business in Europe was caught in a vicious circle. It never really played a huge role to begin with, and it had its ups and downs, but with less and less cars being sold, think of tens or a couple hundred cars a year, the need to maintain a dealer network and parts service also became less and less interesting. And so even less cars were getting sold. Brands like Buick and Mercury were recognized less and less, and well, you get the idea. By the 2000s, those who bought American cars were typically older retired folks trying to remember the good old days when their dad bought an American car. So really just a niche enthusiast market. And then there was a difference between European and American automotive regulations, which required additional efforts and costs to convert American models to comply with European regulations. By the mid-2000s, some American car makers like Chrysler and GM tried to bring some of its American brands and cars back into the picture, but it was a lost cause. Most Europeans had already forgotten about them, and in what way would an American car stand out anyway compared to what they could buy at home? Chrysler discontinued their efforts after the disastrous partnership with Daimler and Mercedes, and GM closed up shop after 2008 crisis, and the only one left is Ford. But they have been selling models specifically made by and for the European market since the 1930s, so how American are they over here anyway? So to give a clear and concise answer, it's just not the size of the car alone, it's the complete package. You can't really buy an American car anymore, and if you do, you get a car that is generally big, very costly to buy, very costly to own, with almost no supporting dealer network, and a very low resale value because of the lack of brand awareness. But you know what? Let me show you what I mean. In this second part of the video, I'm gonna do some calculations. Let's say I want a modern-day American car. I want a big, fat Cadillac Escalade, a huge SUV. This car is not officially sold over here, so not officially sold in the Netherlands, but there are some small companies that are specialized in importing them, so you can buy them here, but what if I want to import it myself? On the website of Cadillac, I see that if I want to buy a mid-range Escalade, the suggested retail price is about $100,000, which is roughly 93,000 euros. And I'll continue in euros from here, but I'll include the dollars. So, I bought a car in the USA. Now it's time to bring it to Europe. Let's say it cost about 2,000 euros to get it shipped to the Netherlands. When it arrives in the port of Rotterdam, it's time to pay the import duties. These are 10% of the retail price plus shipping cost, so that's an additional 9,500 euros. Now it's time to pay the tax man. The VAT, or value-added tax, is 21% and calculated of the total cost at this point, so that's another whopping 22,000 euros. But we're not done yet. Oh no. Welcome to the Netherlands, because over here we have another tax known as BPM. Initially, this was a luxury tax from the 1960s, when owning a car was still seen as a luxury. But these days it is some sort of emission tax, and the more polluting the car is, the more you're going to pay. Luckily, the Escalade with its whopping 6.2-liter V8 is no tree hugger, and the calculations are a bit complex, but trust me when I say that I need to pay an additional whopping 65,000 euros of emission tax. Last but not least, let's be generous and add another 5,000 bucks worth of fees, registrations, licenses, and modifications to the car to meet European regulations. And ta-da! This is what an Escalade would actually cost in Europe. Almost 200,000 euros. All the extra cost more than doubled its original retail price. I literally pay a Cadillac Escalade worth of taxes. To put it into perspective, you know what else I can get directly here in Europe for 200 grand? Audi SQ8, Range Rover P550e, BMW XM, or a Porsche Cayenne. But we're not done yet, because after taking out a second mortgage to get the car, now it's time to calculate the monthly running cost of an Escalade. First up is the vehicle tax. Over here it is based on the weight of the car. In some other countries it is based on fuel consumption or engine displacement or vehicle size, but here it is the car's weight. The idea is that if the car is heavy, it must have loads of luxury equipment to carry around, and thus it's a luxury car, and thus you should pay accordingly. Luckily, the Escalade is no athlete, coming in at almost 6,000 pounds or 2,500 kilograms, and I'd pay 191 euros per month in road taxes. Then there is insurance. Based on my age and no previous accidents recorded, I like to have the so-called all-risk insurance that pretty much covers everything, so every damage. This costs another 277 euros a month. Then there is fuel. This one is a bit tough as there are so many variables, like how much are you going to use the car and how far you're going to drive every day, etc. You get it. Based on the given fuel consumption of the Escalade, it's only slightly worse than my current car, so I can safely say I have to fill it up every week. With the fuel price hovering around 2 euros a liter or $8 a gallon, yeah, that's right, $8. Think about that next time you cry at the gas station in the US thinking life is unfair. That means that I pay another $560 worth of fuel per month. And then there is maintenance. I guess an average of $100 a month is fair. It's a completely new vehicle, but parts are somewhat rare and expensive over here since it's a luxury car after all. The total adds up to a staggering $1,100 a month I'd pay for owning a brand spanking new Escalade, but this comes with 4 disclaimers. Number 1, I haven't even considered depreciation. I think it's very hard to give an estimate, but considering it is a rare car nobody really wants over here, good luck selling it after you're done with it, and I think the depreciation will actually be catastrophic. As you can see, no car payments. The system of auto loans and car payments so common in the USA is very uncommon in the Netherlands. Most of us are raised with the idea that you can only pay for something when you saved up for it. These calculations are based on a heavy luxury SUV. Imagine that you are even more royally screwed if you buy a big and fairly inexpensive SUV, like a Chevrolet Suburban or Ford Expedition. You pay roughly the same, but you get less in return. The average monthly salary in the Netherlands is around $3,000. This means that you'd spend a third of your salary on an Escalade or something similar, if you really want to buy such a car. I hope this really puts a couple things in perspective, and this is just an Escalade. I also ran the numbers for the Ford Mustang, and that gets even more ridiculous. Instead of importing it through a specialized company, Ford officially sells the Mustang over here. So let's say I want the GT version with a V8 engine and 6-speed manual. The suggested retail price in the US? $43,000 or 40,000 euros. Suggested retail price in the Netherlands? A money-sucking 132,000 euros. That's $142,000. This effectively more than tripled the price. So when I buy a Mustang, I effectively buy 3, 1 for me and 2 for the government. I think you start to get the picture here. There's nothing wrong with American cars per se, but they're completely priced out of the market, and there isn't really anything they can do about it. That's just how our local taxes work. In case of the Mustang, which is a sports car but one for the masses with a fairly basic interior and affordable price, it directly competes with the high-end sports cars over here, price-wise. Because you know what I also can get for $142,000? An Audi A8 with roughly the same power, a Porsche 718 Cayman, or a Lotus Emira. So who buys modern-day American cars over here? Roughly 3 types of people. The first ones are what I like to call the regulars. These buy cars such as the Tesla Model 3 and the Ford Mach-E, and I hope you can see where this is going. These are all electric cars, and much like many other countries, the Netherlands also has special regulations for the promotion of EVs, including tax advantages and deductions. Plus, don't get me wrong, but I don't consider Mustang Mach-E's as true American cars, if you know what I mean. Then there are also Dodge pickup trucks. Wait, what? Yeah, much like the US, the full-size pickup has also found its way over here. But how? These things are huge, heavy, thirsty vehicles. They would suck the money right out of your pockets, right? As I've just explained with my Escalade example. Well, not if it's a company car. If you buy it as a company car strictly for commercial use and limited personal use, you don't pay any BPM, so no emission or registration tax. You pay half the usual road tax, and you can even address some of the maintenance costs as business expenses. And so in recent years, American car shows have been flooded with all the same basic, boring, dark gray Dodge lease pickup trucks. And oh, their owners like to thump their chests, priding themselves that they absolutely love the American way of life, which is nothing more than a very narrow vision consisting of cowboy boots, barbecuing, owning guns and shooting them at minority groups and getting away with it. No, you don't like American cars, you just like tax advantages. The second group is what I like to call the enthusiasts. Those that are pretty much people like me that really love American cars and really go the extra mile to get something obscure and unique and are willing to pay the full price for it. People that bought and owned V8 Ford Mustangs, Chevrolet Corvettes, Dodge Challengers and Cadillac V-Series performance cars. But of course there remains somewhat of a rare sight. Not long ago I saw a Lincoln MKX, and it just makes you wonder who the hell buys a Lincoln crossover over here where you have so many alternatives. The last group is simply the commercial market, like emergency services. Back in the 1980s, the Rotterdam Police Department used Chevrolet Suburbans as police cars. And as you may know, the average European car in the 80s wasn't exactly large, so these beasts had quite the commanding presence on the road. Up until the late 2000s, Chevrolet Express vans were used as ambulances, and as of the present day, some funeral homes use Cadillacs and Lincolns as hearses, while there are also plenty of European alternatives. The only time I see a fairly recent Cadillac, 9 out of 10 times it's a hearse. And this concludes a little peek into the European perception of American cars. As you can see, many Europeans buy a car with their wallet and not their heart. It's a matter of money, and modern American cars are at a huge price disadvantage in some countries. Completely priced out of the market and therefore simply not competitive and a first choice. So you have to be a special kind of enthusiast, or really just crazy, if you want a car that comes from the United States. Remember that the next time you ask me to get a Challenger with a V8.
Ever wondered why American cars are all about power and size while European cars focus on handling and refinement? Let's find out why American and European cars are so different. Get ready for a ride you won't forget. Historical differences. To truly understand the differences between American and European cars, we have to start with their respective histories. After World War II, America's economy was booming, and the automobile industry played a huge role in the country's economic growth. The big three American automakers, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, became household names and were synonymous with American cars. These cars have a long history of being big, powerful, and affordable, with an emphasis on straight-line speed. But across the pond in Europe, the automobile industry was more fragmented, with many smaller automakers spread across different countries. Europe was still recovering from the war, and fuel was both scarce and expensive. So European automakers had to focus on making smaller, more fuel-efficient cars that could handle the narrow, winding roads of Europe's cities. And let's not forget about brand identity. American cars are often associated with specific brands such as Chevrolet or Ford, while European cars tend to be associated with countries such as Germany or Italy. This difference is also rooted in historical context, as the automobile industry in America was more consolidated, with fewer major players dominating the market. Design differences. But what about design differences? Well, the historical context played a big role in influencing the variation of designs between the two continents. American cars are known for their bold, aggressive designs with lots of chrome and flashy colors. Think about the Chevrolet Camaro. It has a muscular body with a lot of chrome accents and comes in bright, eye-catching colors like red and yellow. In contrast, a European car like Audi A4 has a more understated design with sleek lines and a minimalist approach to styling. It often comes in more muted colors like black, white, and silver. And here's the interesting part. These design differences aren't just about aesthetics. They also reflect cultural differences between Europe and America. In the US, there is often an emphasis on the size of things, including cars. This is because larger cars are often associated with status and wealth, and Americans may want to show off their success through their vehicles. In contrast, in Europe, there may be less of a focus on size and more emphasis on practicality and efficiency. This leads to a focus on bold, attention-grabbing designs that stand out from the crowd. So in Europe, the emphasis is more on subtlety and sophistication. Cars are seen as a status symbol, but not in the same way they are in the US. Instead of showing off wealth and status, European cars are meant to reflect a sense of taste and refinement. Performance differences. Of course, one of the biggest differences between American and European cars is their performance. American cars are known for their raw power and speed, while European cars are known for their agility and handling. So why is that? It all comes down to the types of roads each continent has. You see, in America, we've got long, straight highways that are often wider than a football field. So American cars are designed to reach high speeds without having to worry too much about handling. But in Europe, the roads are narrow, winding, and often very crowded with other drivers. This means that cars need to be able to handle well at high speeds and in tight corners. Now you might be thinking, what about horsepower? Surely that plays a role, right? And you're absolutely right. American cars tend to have more powerful engines with higher horsepower ratings, which is one of the reasons they are known for their raw power and straight line speed. Take the 2022 Chevrolet Corvette Z06, which has a 5.5-liter V8 engine that produces over 600 horsepower. That's some serious muscle. In contrast, European cars tend to have smaller, more efficient engines with lower horsepower ratings, but with a greater emphasis on handling and agility. For example, the 2022 Porsche 911 Carrera S has a 3.0-liter flat-six engine that produces 443 horsepower. While this horsepower rating may be lower than some American muscle cars, the Porsche 911 is famous for its exceptional handling and precise steering. It's worth noting that these are generalizations and that there are exceptions to these trends. For example, some American cars such as the Dodge Challenger Hellcat and the Ford Mustang GT500 have great handling along with high speeds, while some European cars such as the Audi RS6 Avant and the Mercedes-AMG E63S have horsepower ratings that approach 600 horsepower. However, these are generally outliers, and the overall trend is for American cars to prioritize raw power and speed, while European cars prioritize handling and agility. Technology differences. Up next, we have the differences in technology between American and European cars. American cars are often packed with the latest gadgets and gizmos, from touchscreen infotainment systems to lane departure warning systems. European cars, on the other hand, tend to focus more on the basics: good handling, good brakes, and good suspension. But European cars actually have a long history of innovation and technology. Many of the most important automotive innovations, from disc brakes to electronic fuel injection, were developed in Europe. However, European automakers tend to be more conservative when it comes to introducing new technology. In recent years, European automakers have invested heavily in developing new technologies, particularly in electric and autonomous vehicles. BMW, Volkswagen, Daimler, and Volvo are among those leading the way. But while they're always looking for ways to innovate, European automakers tend to prioritize refining existing technologies over introducing new untested systems. This approach is partly due to European customers' hesitation towards new technology, and automakers' desire to ensure reliability and safety before introducing new features or systems. For example, Volkswagen's diesel engine issues led to increased caution in introducing new technology. Overall, European automakers are investing in new technologies while balancing innovation with reliability and safety. Another difference between American and European cars is their approach to safety. While both continents prioritize safety, their approaches differ. American cars tend to have more safety features such as lane departure warning systems, blind spot monitoring, and forward collision warnings. European cars, on the other hand, focus more on fundamental safety features like good handling, brakes, and suspension. They also tend to have more advanced safety features, such as electronic stability control and anti-lock brakes, which were developed in Europe. Infrastructural and legislation differences. American and European cars are different due to a variety of factors, including historical and cultural preferences, regulatory standards, and infrastructure differences. As I already told you, there are significant infrastructural differences between America and Europe, such as the road network. But did you know there is also a difference in the availability and cost of fuel? Gasoline is generally cheaper in the US than in Europe, which has historically led American car manufacturers to focus on producing larger, less fuel-efficient vehicles. In contrast, European car manufacturers have been forced to prioritize fuel efficiency due to higher gas prices and stricter emissions regulations. These strict environmental laws led to the adoption of new technologies such as catalytic converters and diesel particulate filters. European car manufacturers have also been at the forefront of developing hybrid and electric vehicles in response to these regulations. This difference is highly reflected in trucks. In America, pickup trucks are extremely popular, with the Ford F-150 being the best-selling vehicle in the country for many years. This is largely due to the country's rural culture and the need for heavy-duty vehicles for work and recreation. In Europe, on the other hand, pickup trucks are much less popular, with smaller, more fuel-efficient cars being the norm. Now, you may have heard that European cars are more environmentally friendly. However, it's important to note that this perception is not entirely accurate. While European cars may be more fuel efficient, they still have a significant impact on the environment. Additionally, American automakers have also made significant strides in recent years to improve the fuel efficiency of their vehicles and reduce their impact on the environment. Future trends. And finally, we look into the trends of the future. So what does the future hold for American and European cars? There are a few trends that are likely to shape the industry in the coming years. One of the biggest is the shift towards electric and autonomous vehicles. Both American and European automakers are investing heavily in these technologies, which could fundamentally change the way we think about cars. However, even in a world of electric and autonomous cars, there will still be differences between American and European cars. The design, performance, and technology differences that we've discussed will still be relevant, and they may even become more pronounced as automakers try to differentiate themselves in a crowded market. And with this, we have come to the end of this video. We hope you've enjoyed learning about the differences between American and European cars. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on our upcoming videos. And as always, thank you for watching.
Back tonight with a new look at gas prices, this time taking a global look. We know prices are high here in the United States, but is that the case for the rest of the world? Here's our Verify team.
The Great American Road Trip might be a little shorter this summer because of these high gas prices. But is this just an American problem? A Verify viewer asked us to look into this graphic being shared online, which claims the U.S. has lower gas prices than these 8 other places: Hong Kong, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Israel, Germany, and France. To find out if that's true, we referenced several gas price databases, and we can verify, yes, U.S. gas prices are lower than these 8 other places around the world. Global Petrol Prices compiles the average price of gasoline per gallon in U.S. dollars for most of the countries in the world. Check out the average price of gas per gallon for the 8 areas included in the social media post as of June 6th. For comparison, the average gas price in the U.S. was about $4.96 per gallon as of June 8th, although it is more than $5 now, according to AAA. But why is gas in the U.S. cheaper? Global Petrol Prices explains that as a general general rule, richer countries have higher prices for gasoline, while poorer countries and the countries that produce and export oil have significantly lower prices. The U.S. is an exception to this rule, though, due in large part to lower fuel taxes. European countries tend to tax petroleum fuels at the highest level globally, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. And Europe is also experiencing inflation, and energy prices right now are skyrocketing. Though the U.S. currently has cheaper gas prices than many other countries, it's not the cheapest. Gas costs less than $1 per gallon in Venezuela, Libya, and Iran. With your Verify, I'm Abby Lorico.
And if you want us to verify something, you can just send an email to verify@12newsnow.com, or you can get in touch with us on social media.
Breaking overnight, President Trump enacting sweeping new tariffs on steel and aluminum, 25%. Europeans are retaliating in a major way. And this morning, the huge concern is American consumers who are caught in the middle of all this and could soon be paying the price literally. Let's walk you through this really quick. Overnight, the president slaps 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports from all countries. And just a few hours later, Europe's remarkable retaliation, $28 billion worth of tariffs they now have imposed on U.S. goods going into their countries. Bottom line, the uncertainty everyone was already feeling just got upstaged by this word, unjustified. That is how the EU and close allies like Australia are feeling about Trump's actions right now, as U.S. markets soon open after yesterday's volatile close.
Everyone is keeping a very close eye on futures, of course, and preparing for what is to come with the markets when they open very soon after President Trump's latest round of tariffs kicked in at midnight. An across the board 25% tariff on all foreign steel and aluminum coming into the United States, both metals used in the manufacturing so many things, from cars to medical devices to food cans, which means higher prices for American businesses, many of them, and also American consumers. CNN's Vanessa Yurkevich, she is here with a look at all of this. What is the impact on all this?
Well, this trade war just went global.
Yeah.
The 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel coming into the country took effect at midnight. And as you mentioned, so many things are made with steel and aluminum. And if you just look at all the countries that we import steel and aluminum from, I mean, there they are. And that is a big, big number. Also, to point out that the prices of those steel and aluminum imports will rise, and that'll have an impact on U.S. steel and aluminum prices. Already in the past 2 months, steel up 30%, aluminum up 15%. And this is critical, obviously, for American consumers because, as you mentioned, cars, appliances, medical devices are going to see the impact of these tariffs eventually. We heard from Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick last night. He talked about what he thought tariffs meant for the economy. Take a listen.
Will these policies be worth it if they lead to a recession, even a short-term recession?
These policies are the most important thing America has ever had.
So it is worth it.
It is worth it. I don't think the only reason there could possibly be a recession is because of the Biden nonsense that we had to live with.
Now, Goldman Sachs just upped their forecast on a recession to 20% from 15%. The odds are still relatively low, according to them, but people are talking about this, what this means for the overall economy. Futures this morning slightly up. They could just be waiting to see what happens today. A little bit of a recovery from yesterday.
I think futures were up too, right?
I was going to say in the morning they were up, and that obviously changed throughout the day. And if we have it here, it's just interesting to see what the markets have done in the first term and the second term with Trump. We may not have that, but essentially markets were up. There. Okay. Markets were up for the first term. You can see it right down there on the left-hand side of your screen. Markets have turned down just in the first 6 weeks of his second term. Obviously, many more years to go, but it just shows the really big difference in what is happening in the first couple weeks of his administration. We will wait to see what happens at the opening bell. So much can change in so little time. The EU, as we know, just reciprocated against us $28 billion worth of goods now taxed because of these aluminum and steel tariffs.
CNN's Matt Egan is joining me now. What does the latest round of tariffs really mean to Americans? Because you don't feel it immediately, but Wall Street generally gives you some sense. You do get hit there first.
That's true. I mean, look, Sarah, another day, another tariff hike from the president. The goal here is to try to level the playing field in global trade. The problem, though, is that some experts are warning it could backfire because steel and aluminum are critical inputs, right? They are used to make everything from medical devices and cans, appliances, infrastructure, power lines, and the big one, cars. Remember, cars, they have they have a lot of steel and aluminum in them, right? And car prices, they're already basically at record highs. So it's hard to see how making a key input more expensive with this 25% tariff is going to help things here. Some experts are warning that, yes, this could backfire on not just consumers, but also on workers. I talked to Ken Smetters. He's a professor at Wharton, where the president went to school, and he said this is not going to help manufacturing. It will hurt manufacturing. Even Alcoa, one of the biggest aluminum makers in the United States, has warned that these tariffs could kill 100,000 American jobs. There's also the risk that it ignites a global trade war. The U.S. imports a lot of steel and aluminum each year, a lot of it from Canada, but also Mexico, China, the UAE, Brazil, South Korea. Now these countries have to decide how are they going to respond. The European Union, not wasting any time here, they immediately announced retaliatory tariffs on items that are made in America, including, we've seen bourbon, peanut butter, jeans, boats, motorbikes, all of them, $28 billion of U.S. goods face retaliatory tariffs. Now, the EU tariffs, they don't kick in until next month, so that leaves some time for some negotiation, of course. But if they do kick in, this could hurt U.S. workers in these sectors because the stuff that they make just got more expensive.
You know, Trump has been saying, look, there is pain and there is going to be a disruption that's going to happen, but eventually this is going to be good. The question is how long Americans will be able to shoulder this pain. We will have to wait and see, and we are waiting for the markets. Right now, things looking slightly up, but nothing like what happened with the downturn yesterday.
Yeah,
right?
Slightly up after some days of really steep losses.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so
Sarah.
much. We'll wait for the bell to ring. Kate?
And as the president's sweeping tariffs on foreign steel and aluminum will likely be adding even more pressure on what's been a week of U.S. stocks plunging, the Wall Street Journal's editorial board continues to call out President Trump in a way really that only the Wall Street Journal can, writing this in part: the trouble with trade wars is that once they begin, they can quickly escalate and get out of control, all the more so when politicians are nearing an election campaign, as Canada now is, or when Mr. Trump behaves as if his manhood is implicated because a foreign nation won't take his nasty border taxes lying down. We said from the beginning that this North American trade war is the dumbest in history, and we were being kind. That's from the Wall Street Journal. Joining us right now is Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. There's that side of it, Senator. But then you have the iron and steel industry, aluminum steel industry in the United States, and they like what they're seeing here. A trade group calls these tariffs very effective. The head of American Iron and Steel Institute saying that things would be, without those tariffs, much worse for the industry. So what say you about where things stand today with this trade war?
This trade war threatens not only a global trade conflict, but also an immediate recession for the United States. Higher prices for consumers, not just on cars, but on gasoline and energy. For example, the imports of Canadian electricity, which are about 11% of the Northeast supply, and prices of groceries, food, milk, eggs will likely rise. And the imminence of a recession may be less painful for the billionaires and for the Secretary of Commerce, who says it's no big thing, but it will affect average, everyday Americans. So the pain is going to be felt nationwide, and it's avoidable. The last time we tried one of these major trade wars, I think under President McKinley, it proved to be a disaster, and he concluded it was a mistake.
Well, the president was asked about the immediate impacts that we've seen, which is this massive sell-off we've seen in U.S. stocks and continued fears about a recession, given how he's answered the questions around it. And I want to play for you what President Trump said yesterday.
Do you and your tariff policies right now bear any responsibility for the turmoil we're seeing this week?
Biden gave us a horrible economy. He gave us horrible inflation. And I think the market was going to go very, very bad.
When does this become the Trump economy? He is just 6 weeks in. Can he argue this still is not his to own?
The economy under Joe Biden was chugging along pretty well, and what Donald Trump is doing now is potentially going to disrupt disastrously a success story for America. And that's why business executives are expressing alarm. The Wall Street Journal is calling it the dumbest thing they've seen. And why he's doing it is really a mystery. He should be building on this economy, not trying to undermine and destroy it with these self-destructive tariffs, which are not only undermine American economic power, but also militarily, and of course are standing in the world because nobody can figure out where we're going from here. And the back and forth, tariffs one day, withdrawn or delayed the next, creates an uncertainty which itself undermines the economy.